Kathy Brasby, and we will continue in this lesson our study of the Prodigal Son, that parable from Luke 15, where Jesus is responding to criticism from the Pharisees by telling parables. If you remember in prior lessons, we've talked about the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin, and our lesson last week, and we'll continue into today, is really the parable of the lost son. In our last lesson, we followed this young son as he went to a foreign country, squandered all of his inheritance, came back, and he meets his father. And we saw an amazing story there where the father ran out to greet him. Because if the son would have come into the village, the villagers would have been incredibly harsh and cruel with him. They were very angry with him for what he had done to his own family and really, by extension, to the entire village. The father prevents that with an incredibly humiliating act where he runs out of town. But let's go ahead and pick up the lesson at Luke 15, verse 20. So verse 20 tells us that this young man got up and went to his father. But while he was a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Last time we talked about a rabbinical form of repentance, whereby God came part way, but we had a lot to do to meet him. And we had to repair what we had done wrong. We had to earn the Father's love. That idea is not the sort of repentance that we're seeing in this story. This is what the son thought he needed to do, but the father expected none of it. The father instead simply poured out love. He humiliated himself, and yet he protected his son from the village in this humiliating love. But we see that the son starts his speech that he's planned probably all the way on the walk home. "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." If you remember, we talked last time about this prodigal not understanding what the issue was. For the prodigal, the issue was the money, the inheritance. For the father, it was the loss of a son from his family. So the father was focusing on relationship. The son was focusing on money. So that's why he has said, "I am no longer worthy to be called your son." He's recognizing he is not a worthy son. But the father cuts him off. He doesn't get to say the entire speech to his father like he had rehearsed earlier. Father cuts him off. And the father turns to his servants. Now these servants, being good servants, would have followed him out there. And they're right there. And he turns to them and he says, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him." Who would you guess the best robe belongs to? If you're guessing the father, you're correct. By putting that robe on the son, even before he enters the village, the father is claiming him as son and part of the family. The father also says to the servants, "Put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet." A ring likely was the father's ring, a signet ring, a ring of family and relationship and belonging. Put sandals on his feet. Servants were barefooted. Noblemen had sandals. So before the son enters the village, he has the endorsement of his father. He has a robe, he has a ring, he has sandals on. He is not going to be hired as a servant to the father. He has been brought back into the family. He hasn't even been given the opportunity to finish his speech of repentance because the father simply accepts him back. And we see here again the father's incredible love for for that one which was lost. At this point, we may be getting a hint that the son is making a full repentance, a full return back to his father, because he accepts the robe, he accepts the ring and the sandals, he accepts the party and the celebration. He has had demonstrated for him incredible love and an opportunity to be part of the family, and he accepts that. When the father says to kill the calf, in that culture, they wouldn't have killed a calf just for the family, to have for a supper for father and two sons. No, that would have fed the entire village. So this was compassion for the village as well. He kills his calf and he invites the entire village to celebrate with him. The joy must be shared, and the village accepts what the father has done, and they join in this celebration. This is going to be a grand banquet to celebrate a lost son returning, not to be a servant, but to be a son. So again, we see parallels. Jesus has made parallels in these parables that he is talking to the Pharisees. Jesus surely intended for those Pharisees to see this story, this act by the Father, as a very dramatic representation of how God welcomes sinners. When the Father leaves the house to come out to his Son in love and humility, we see, at least in part, how God, through incarnation, came to earth, came out of his house to welcome his children in love and humility. If you have studied that great poem in Philippians, you see the description of Jesus as coming humbly in love. And that parallels what we see here with this Father coming out in humble love. Something we need to remember as we, in the next lesson, will look at the older son, that this father already had a servant-type son in the house. And we'll unpack that more in the next lesson. This father wanted more. He didn't want a servant-type son. He wanted a son. He wanted a family. His father's love was amazing, deep, abiding. He didn't keep track of all the things either son had done against him. His love was just genuine and pure. That's a picture Jesus wanted the Pharisees to see, and a picture we should try to see as well. So let's see a main lesson for each one of these characters in this parable. The prodigal always had the option of returning home. We can apply that to us as well. However wicked we are, we can always return home. As we look at the father went to incredible lengths to offer reconciliation to this prodigal. In the same way, God, in his grace, offers restoration to people, no matter how awful they are, no matter how much they've done, and how inadequate they are to do anything to get in God's good favor. They only need to accept the robe like this prodigal did. Now, what we will see next time with the older brother is that he should have rejoiced with his father as this lost son came home. As we looked at that parallel chart a couple of weeks ago, these Pharisees fall into the same place as this older brother. They were not willing for Jesus to extend grace to any sinners. They were like the servant son. They had done everything, and yet they didn't recognize God's love and incredible grace even for them. This story, and we're still in the midst of it, but this story is really a story of sonship versus servanthood. And that was a basic issue between Jesus and these Pharisees. And it's a basic issue even today. We have people who believe they have to earn their way. I had a man once who told me he would go back to Jesus once he quit swearing, but he didn't have it under control yet. He was really like this prodigal son, saying, okay, here's the things that I need to do, and I'm going to do it my way, and I will earn whatever I get. I'm not returning to a relationship with God until I've earned my way there. A significant phrase from the Father as he's greeting the Son, and he is instructing his servants on the preparation for this celebration. He says to the servants, to the Son, and to whoever else might have trailed along, "This son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So the prodigal left his family. In a sense, he was dead to his family by his own choice. So the Father is saying, this son who was dead to the family has come back to life. So we see again that relationship, that part of God's family is so important in this. We haven't talked very much about the older son. He's only briefly introduced at the very beginning of this parable, but his lack of involvement is noticeable. He didn't step in when the younger son wanted the inheritance, which would have been his responsibility as the older son, is to navigate a reconciliation between son and father, to restore the family, and he didn't do that. We don't see him now. As the father goes out to greet the younger son, where's the older son? We will see him in the next lesson, but we need to notice his absence. Something that we will see emphasized in the parable about the older son is how the father already had a servant son. The older son told his father, later in the parable, how he had worked so hard for his father. And what the father wanted was a son, not a servant. He wanted a relationship and he wanted a family. And that's what drove him in responding to the prodigal, was to restore a family. Out of love for his family, he did whatever he could. He was willing to humiliate himself to bring this younger son back into the family. If the father would have waited in the house until the son arrived, he would have had another servant son. It took an extraordinary effort on his part, something that just wasn't done. He broke traditions, he broke cultural expectations in running out to his son. He wanted a son, not a servant. We have several things we can learn from these three characters in the parable, and we're going to zero in just for a moment on each one. Again, the prodigal always had the option of returning home. The father had never shut that off, and we know that because of how the father responded to him when he did come home. It was the son's choice to stay away because he thought things were better on his own. He thought he was better off away from the father. But the fact he always had the option to return home translates to us as well. We have been guilty of walking away from the Father, of not being in the Father's family. And we always have the option of returning to this magnificent love that was waiting for us as we come back and are restored to the family. The second piece to really notice is this amazing love that the Father showed to his Son in restoring him to the family. By extension, we can see something of how God shows amazing love to us to help to restore us to the family. The third character, whom we've talked just briefly about, we'll look at in more depth in the next lesson, the older son should have rejoiced with everyone else. The villagers, the father, they were rejoicing over the lost son. He resented it. He mumbled and grumbled, to go back to our Pharisees. Even those who claim to be in the family actually begrudge what the father is doing. They claim to be people of God, and they are angry with what Jesus offered to sinners. And all three of these characters really help us understand what Jesus was saying to the Pharisees. They were begrudging Jesus welcoming sinners, and this story kind of hit them between the eyes. Sonship versus servanthood is the basic theme of this parable. That's a basic theme of the entire chapter, really, is belonging and being a part. And when you're outside of it, how love will welcome you in amazing ways. A question we always have to ask, are we God's servants and is he a law-giving master? Or are we his beloved children and he is a compassionate father? This parable really helps us to dig into those issues about who God is and who we see him as. The father has said that he brought this son from death to life. Now, if we think about how ironic this was, that when the son asked for the inheritance, he was in essence saying to the father, I wish you were dead. But also, the son made himself dead to his family by leaving and trusting his own resources. So in returning and in being willing to accept what the father has given to him, he is now alive to his family. I think it's important to notice that this son could have refused to take the robe and the ring. He could have refused the party and the celebration. He could have continued on with his original plan. So we get the idea that he did change his mind, and he is fully restored. He has fully repented and being willing to accept what the Father has given him and being willing to be accepted back into the family. He didn't pay off the inheritance. He wasn't able to restore what he had squandered away, but the Father cared about him as a son, and he is now restored as a son. So we will close out this part of the parable now, and we're going to be looking at the older son next time. Some points that I really want to make is how much we learn about even Jesus' ministry in this parable, because we see a father willing to leave his house, to go out of his house, to meet this returning son. In the same way, Jesus left his house, he left heaven, and was willing to be humble in reaching out in love to restore to the family those who are lost. It's a powerful image that Jesus is giving to these Pharisees. The nature of God, the nature of the incarnation, coming down to earth in humility. If you've ever read Philippians 2, the poem about Jesus, it talks about how Jesus became a human and took on human suffering out of love for us. It's a powerful image, and Jesus shares it here in this parable. Next time, we will look at the older son and see what Jesus lays before these Pharisees in answer to their grumbling. So thank you again for joining me. I hope you found some applications for your own life in this lesson. Please come back next time and join me as we conclude Luke 15 by looking at this older son and Jesus' message to the Pharisees. Have a wonderful week. God bless.